Welcome. Welcome to this bonus episode of Pele's Poetry Podcast, a companion piece, a couple of extra verses, if you will, to episode 11, the Odyssey of the Odyssey. And Pele, what an Odyssey it's turning into. Even longer and more complicated than Homer ever imagined. And that's not just the film and the book, it's our podcast. Tell us the story of a complicated podcast, Pele.
Yeah, it's true, isn't it? I mean, I suppose we should have known that the minute we dipped our toes in the wine dark sea, that was going to come right up to our necks in a good way. We've had such good responses from so many people we know, like Fabio, Barry, my husband, and Stephen Mapes, the great friend and actor who's going to be reading some of the poems for us, and my friend Ramona Liberoff, who saw the film and said that she likes it, that I sounded so feisty on the podcast.
We disagreed a little bit, didn't we?
But that wasn't the interesting bit. The interesting bit was that she says that the film is like the Bourne Ultimatum on a Greek island. So obviously she didn't like it, or maybe she loved it for that reason. And then there's a lot of noise around Emily Wilson. You want to tell us about that and the translator of the most popular translation?
Yeah, well, her comments are, well, she's saying some pretty critical things. Look, it's a blockbuster for sure, isn't it? There's no doubt about that. It took the film, the Christopher Nolan film, took more than $500 million in its first 2 weekends, $625 million and counting, I think it's up to. But I'm calling it a flockbuster. You want to know why?
Yeah, I'm waiting.
Oh, okay. I thought you might just interject and say a flockbuster, Rich. That sounds interesting. But okay, some of the best lines always fall flat, don't they? I'm sure Homer found that as well. I'm calling it a flockbuster because the flock has divided into two distinct subherds. Those who love it and are barring contentedly, and there are plenty, hence the huge takings, and those who are, if you like, bleating discontentedly because they definitely don't love it. The opposite, in fact, is another way of saying, in a rather clunky way, that it's a Marmite film. You either love it or hate it. There's no middle ground. But of course, Marmite.
And you and I are stringing ourselves to the bottom of the sheep to escape from the argument.
Well, exactly. I was going to say that Marmite wasn't around in Homer's time. Sheep were, so I feel as if Flockbuster works for that reason as well. Anyway, among the bleaters or the haters, as you were saying, is the good Professor Emily Wilson, who, as you say, her 2017 translation we referenced in our last episode, the full episode 11, and indeed Christopher Nolan himself referenced in early publicity for the film. She said of the film, and I quote from a recent essay in the London Review of Books, "I would be ashamed to have written any part of this. Ooh, it has nothing convincing to say." I mean, ouch, eh?
Well, I suppose if you spent a lot of years, as she has, relating and dedicating your soul and your brain to a translation of such magnitude, then, you have a right to say, I don't approve,
She's dedicated her body to it as well, because she's got tattoos the length of both arms, hasn't she, as well, with sort of Homeric references in them.
Yeah, she's groovy. But yeah, and also I think I did feel like, if I've been a bit critical after our last podcast, Homeric podcast, and I thought that's exactly what is motoring and creates the excitement and life around a piece of work. The more critical everyone is of each other, as long as it's informed and rational and not unkind, the more we're breaking this poem open in the way it deserves to be broken open in the contemporary landscape. So,
well, it comes from a hugely well-informed place. If it comes from the mouth or the pen of Emily Wilson, clearly. Let me give you the full quote. It was paraphrased as lacks psychological, emotional, political, and ethical depth in the headline that attracted my attention. That was in The Guardian. The full quote that I dug out is this: Nolan's Odyssey lacks many of the elements that make the poem, there we are, the poem great. It has nothing convincing to say about time, memory, history, war, or about the relationship between one warrior's glorious return and the lives of his family, adversaries, comrades, friends, and neighbours. It lacks psychological, emotional, political, and ethical depth. Its narrative structure is gimmicky. The writing is abysmal. None of the characters has convincing motivation for their actions or words. There are no sex scenes, and all the food looks horrible.
Wow. Gosh, I wonder what Nolan thought of that. I mean, he probably laughs it off, you know. He probably thinks everyone's entitled to their opinion. And
well, when
it's all
you've made
grist and mill for him.
652 million quid in the first fortnight, you can probably laugh it off. I think the film sort of cost about half that to make, so he's probably already in the black, isn't he? But to be fair, look, I mean, I'm giving a slightly one-sided account of Wilson's piece in the London Review of Books. She did at least have the good grace to say that the film is bringing audiences back to cinema and away from sitting at home and watching things on Netflix. And also, she conceded that her translation, along with lots of others, is flying off the bookshelves. So, it's good for her financially, it's good for her profile, and perhaps sometimes we're inclined to ramp up the criticism to try and attract headlines. Although, of course, I wouldn't suggest that's what she's done here.
As long as, you know, that she's not, I'm sure she's not, but as long as, you know, people, the perception it doesn't become that there's just one translation worth reading, because there's a myriad of them. And the fun, for me, the fun for everyone should be comparing these translations and seeing which one you like best, and how have they handled that element with using their choice of words, and how's the other person handled that element using their choice of words. I mean, to me, that's a battle scene that, you know, of real vivacity in terms of poetry. Yeah. So the other thing that we've rooted up since the our last podcast was Fabio Barry again, a great art historian, responded to our podcast. He wrote some notes, and one of the notes was, it was actually, I think, Rich, I don't know if you agree, resolved our heated discussion about authorship, and was Homer the real author, or was it a collective, and all that stuff. And sometimes it's just a very simple thing that's true. So this is actually, I think, the best way to understand that dilemma, or that.
We got quite feisty, or you got quite feisty, as one of our correspondents suggested, because I said, well, does it really matter? Was Homer a collective, or was Homer an individual? And will we ever truly know? So go on, tell me, what's Fabio's take on this?
I think it does matter, because, you end up finding truth that way, and I always like resolution. So resolution with questions. Anyway, the poem, apparently, as we know, belongs to the oral tradition. So it's not quite a collective in this case, but the general idea is that it evolved over time. And as it passed through many hands or mouths, or writing and revisions again, like Penelope's loom, it became a part of all of us. But then Homer, he is at the root, and he was actually blind. And I think that his blindness drives the reality of this poem as well. And I just want to say this quote that Fabio sent me by Cicero. I mean, that is how old this poem is, that Cicero was commenting on Homer directly in this case. And he says about it that tradition holds even now that Homer was blind, but we see his painting, not poetry. What region, what coast, what place in Greece, what type and mode of fighting, what battle array, what rowing, what movement of men or of beasts has not been so depicted that he has caused us to see what he himself could not have seen.
Wow. Yeah. And that speaks to the point we were talking about, how maybe a part of the disappointment of seeing a film of your favourite book or your favourite poem, or both in this case, is that the pictures are never quite as good as the ones in your imagination. You have in your mind's eye an idea of how every single character looks, every single scene looks, and then somebody has an interpretation that doesn't quite fit your mind's eye view of it, and you don't like it as much. It shakes.
Well, it's two ends of the scale, isn't it? So it's like one man who creates everything from an interior, or sets it off from his interior, his profoundly visual imagination, literally, because he couldn't see anything around him. And then you've got Nolan, who has it all on the, laid out on a plate visually.
In the exterior, and I guess when it only is passed on through word of mouth as a part of that oral tradition that you speak of there, or when we read it just in black text, perhaps on a white page, it is still to a large extent internal, isn't it? And we are seeing it through, as I say, our imagination. Nolan hasn't that luxury. He has to, as you say, lay it out in front of us on, it's probably not celluloid these days, but you know what I mean. And it becomes so much more fixed and picked over. But hey, look, if we don't like it, if people don't like the film, that is, I mean, suck it up. Another episode, another version, another translation will be along soon. It's part of this, in a sense, it's part of this tapestry, this cloth that Penelope was constantly weaving and unweaving in the Odyssey, and it can be unpicked and re-stitched at any time you want.
The criticism, again, of calling this a story rather than a poem, though, is that it strips out the music, the meter, the oral performative quality of this poem as it's lived and breathed through history and time. And all the things that made it a lived experience are taken away. Now, watching a film is a lived experience, I suppose, but not like it is seeing something live as a lived experience. And the other thing that Fabio told us about, didn't he, was this amazing place called Sperlonga, which is between Naples and Rome, and it's a cave that Tiberius built. So the ancient world, ancient Rome, didn't just hear the Odyssey, they inhabited it physically. They surrounded themselves with objects and reminiscences and symbols of this great work that had been spread from ear to ear. Tiberius and his guests didn't look at representations of the Odyssey from a safe distance. They sat inside the cave, Polyphemus's cave, which is the Cyclops' cave, with these colossal marble sculptures surrounding them in the dark, and the sea and spray coming into them as they dined, as if they were on this ship of chaos.
What a dining room! What a host! So Tiberius's power such that he was able to order his minions to fashion, these fantastic marble statues of characters from Homer's Odyssey, and these were more than life size, weren't they? So you were sitting there eating your, I don't know what they ate, grapes or lamb, lobster, who knows what they were chomping on. But it must have been. Well, I suppose that was one of the earliest visual representations, that these statues got smashed to pieces and were relatively recently found and reassembled.
1978?
Yeah, so they've not been back together for long. But yeah, this must have been one of the earliest visual representations, and I can't imagine it would have stirred up quite so much controversy as this latest visual representation has, the Chris Nolan film. But we'll put some pictures of these Spelonga statuary on our website, because pelecox.com, because they are impressive pieces, are they not?
That's absolutely spectacular. I mean, when I first saw them on Wikipedia about a week ago, I dreamed about them when I went to sleep that night. They just, even on the screen, you could feel the monumentality of interpretation and the potential of that the Roman mentality to recreate what it wanted for these emperors to give size and depth and weight to the things they just wanted to be around. It's just a wonderful metaphor for ancient Rome as well, I think.
It also leaves, these statues also leave a lot to one's imagination. In a way, a film tells you the story, almost tells you how to feel. A poem and even some silent statues allow you room to genuinely think about how you feel and to render your own version, weave, can I say that? Weave into your own version, your own experience, your own imagination, your own character twists and plot turns. And I think there is bound to be always disappointment with a film where, as I say, you are told largely what to think.
And what happened, yeah. How it's going to end.
Yeah.
I mean, that's showing, not telling, isn't it? The great mantra of every poet. Every poet needs to know. Don't tell, show. And that's a brilliant analogy, Rich. You wanted to talk about sound and audibility and noise and volume and
of course there is the noise, and we've talked about this, that is being generated by the film's critics, and I don't just mean those with a negative view, but those who are critiquing it in a very positive way. So that's loud, but there's also the kind of literal loudness of the movie soundtrack. And a couple of people have said to me, and I'm posted on social, that it's really loud. The opening scene, I think, was really loud, or one of the fight scenes or something like that. So, if you like, the mechanical loudness has come as a surprise to a lot of people. And that got me thinking, because I'm interested in exploring the notion that poetry can be quietly noisy, that in the way we were just talking about, that pictures are put into our head when reading a good poem or a book by our imagination. In other words, we're sort of seeing things in our mind's eye. Are we similarly hearing things in our mind's ear from the text, from the poem, from the story? I looked at the books on the shelf behind me, and I concluded that the John Clare collection was pretty quiet and pastoral, and maybe a little bit of birdsong in the background. A very quiet book. And then I saw The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot, and I thought, well, that's noisy, but in a kind of disconcerting, dissonant sort of all the chords are wrong kind of way. And then, of course, yes, Homer's Odyssey and the Iliad, in different ways, very noisy books. And then,
it's like a kind of neurological thing you're talking about, in a way, isn't it? Is it?
I think that's another part of the attraction of poetry that I hadn't sort of thought about in any great depth before. That it's partly to do with the meter, it's partly to do with the rhyme scheme, and all of those things that can drive a poem forward at a sort of sub lingual level. I think you can hear, if you like, the background sound, and that comes across to me most clearly in a skylark poem or a poem about a swift or something like that. You can hear the screaming, you can hear the burbling sound of the skylark ascending or descending. So I'm now going to.
And it's something between singing and thinking, isn't it? Is what I think. It's like between those two things.
And perhaps
listening.
And perhaps occupies a piece of the brain that doesn't get used as often as it perhaps should. So it has that kind of neurological component to it. But I'm going to go back through all of the books on the shelf behind me and give them a volume, sort of 1 to 10. 10 is really loud, 0 to 1 is really, really quiet, and just to see if I can organise them. Because, you could do it alphabetically, you could do it chronologically, couldn't you? But I'm just going to make it an exercise to arrange those books in order of how noisy they are.
That's brilliant. I love it. And you can read us one poem. We can dedicate a whole podcast to you reading the whole spectrum of volume, kind of.
Well, look, I think we should get on to reading some bits from the Odyssey. And just following on from that kind of noisy point, I've chosen The Battle in the Hall, book 22 of the Odyssey. I'm reading a Penguin Classic translation by a fellow, could be a woman, I don't know, I apologise, E.V. Rieu, R-I-E-U. I just found this amongst some boxes of books. So just listen to how noisy this is. Antinous had just reached for his fine cup to take a draught of wine, and the golden two-handled beaker was balanced in his hands. No thought of bloodshed entered his head, for who could guess there in that festive company that one man, however powerful he might be, would bring evil, death, and black doom on him against such odds. Odysseus took aim and shot him in the neck. The point passed clean through his tender throat. The cup dropped from his hand as he was hit, and he lurched over to one side. His life-blood gushed from his nostrils in a turbid jet. His foot lashed out and kicked the table from him. His food was scattered on the ground, and bread and meat lay there in the dirt. When the suitors saw the man collapse, there was uproar in the hall. And so it goes on. You can hear the uproar even before you're told that there is uproar in the hall.
It's almost like the line "there is uproar in the hall" is a way of giving you affirmation that what you felt was true all along. That it's underlining the painting that you are making inside your own head and saying, you're right to paint that. It's fantastically kind, isn't it? Poetry. It's very explanatory. There's no smoke and mirrors. It always looks after its reader very well.
And it is quietly noisy, so I didn't need to raise my voice reading that. The words, if you allow them to sort of settle on you and properly understand the words, the soundtrack is injected into your mind's ear by that really careful, considered choice of words. So I think we should also listen out for the soundtrack, or we should imagine the soundtrack that would accompany the bit that you're about to share with us. And this is when Odysseus, very slowly, making his way home to Ithaca, is torn or has to sail a very careful line between a multi-limbed monster called a Scylla on the one hand, on the one quarter of his ship, and a whirlpool, Charybdis, I think it's pronounced, on the other.
Classic Odyssean dichotomy. Here we are. She has 12 legs, all writhing, dangling down, and 6 long swaying necks, hideous head on each head barbed with a triple row of fangs, thick set, packed tight, and armed to the hilt with black death. Holed up in the cavern's bowels from her waist down, she shoots out her heads out of that terrifying pit, angling right from her nest, wildly sweeping the reefs for dolphins, dogfish, or any bigger quarry she can drag from the thousands amphitrite spawns in groaning seas. No mariners yet can boast they've raced their ship past Scylla's lair without some mortal blow. With each of her 6 heads, she snatches up a man from the dark prowed craft and whisks him off. The other crag is lower, you will see, Odysseus, though both lie side by side, an arrow shot apart. Atop it, a great fig tree rises, shaggy with leaves. Beneath it, awesome Charybdis gulps the dark water down. 3 times a day she vomits it up. 3 times she gulps it down. That terror. Don't be there when the whirlpool swallows down. Not even the earthquake god can save you from disaster.
That makes the point.
Wow.
Yeah, wow for lots of reasons. Wow, because what a cracking story or series of stories the Odyssey contains, but making the point for us about the soundtrack, the gulping down at the end there of the whirlpool, and then vomiting it back up, and the noise of all the earthquakes couldn't challenge that sound. So really putting sounds into our mind's ear, as well as very, very clear and detailed pictures into our mind's eye.
I just like to prove my own points every now and then, but that is Robert Fagel's translation, and that is exactly what he is. He's sonic in a way that other translations aren't to me. So he's absorbed the language that he feels that the Odyssey represents, and he's spitting it out, onto the page with that wildness that you feel when you read him out loud. Anyway, I just think that was, and it's so conversational, isn't it? It's so oral. Jumps off that page. Desperate to be read out loud.
Yeah, which takes us back to that notion of it starting its epic journey as a performed poem, as a piece from the oral tradition. I think perhaps one of the other reasons that people feel quite protective of and precious about potentially the Odyssey, the film, is that just hearing you read that piece there, that yes, it puts very clear pictures in our minds, but your pictures are probably different to my pictures, and my sounds are probably different to your sounds. So we all sort of feel as if we kind of own the Odyssey in our own heads. And of course, what's more is it's such a foundational story in Western culture, at least. And when foundations are kind of picked at, undermined in some way, we worry that the superstructure, forgive the metaphor, but we worry the superstructure will topple over if the foundational pieces are undermined too much. So that's why we feel a little protective of our Odyssey. But of course, the reality is no one owns it. It is at once everybody's but nobody's. I guess the only people who own it momentarily are the actors who played the parts, or the performers, the bards, the rhapsodoi, I think they were called, who performed it originally, and the actors who breathe life into the characters now on Christopher Nolan's film. But that's only a sort of temporary tenancy. It's not a lifetime freehold.
I like to see it as custodianship. What are you doing to the house you're looking after? How are you managing its survival, its upkeep?
And the only way it survives, to follow up on that thought, it's a good one, Pele, is that you have to maintain the property that you are a steward of in order to pass it on in good condition. And the way of maintaining the Odyssey is to keep performing it, to keep reading it, to keep translating it, to keep doing your versions of it. And I think if we judge Christopher Nolan's flockbuster, as I called it at the start, on that basis, whether it's good or bad ultimately matters not. That is a very personal, it's a very subjective view.
Absolutely.
But the important thing is it is getting an airing for a whole heap of people that wouldn't, cross the road to...
It has a beating heart.
A beating heart.
Talking of beating hearts and volume, I just want to read another little section, which is a very quiet part of the poem, if you agree, Rich. And it's Penelope, confronted by a beggar after all those years of waiting, who actually happens to be her husband. And she doesn't realise, but she warms to him. And she's had this dream. And she wants this beggar to analyse it for her. Now, to me, yet again, I know I said last week that Penelope never speaks, but she does speak sometimes. She's a sort of device. And in this case, she's telling a stranger, her dream. You couldn't get much more Freudian than that. I mean, this is pre-Freud by hundreds
About
and
2,700
hundreds of
years.
And Homer was right there, understanding that dreams were symbolic, and that to tell your dreams was telling something else about something else about something else. And here it is. I just think this is beautiful. But please, read this dream for me, won't you? Listen closely. I keep 20 geese in the house from the water trough. They come and peck their wheat. I love to watch them all. But down from a mountain swooped this great hook-beaked eagle. Yes, and he snapped their necks and killed them, one and all, and they lay in heaps throughout the halls, while he, back to the clear blue sky, he soared at once. But I wept and wailed, only a dream, of course.
Beautiful.
And it's Odysseus.
Hell of a dream. Snapped
Hell of a
necks.
yeah.
Quiet,
Hell of
quiet,
a yeah.
quiet but dark.
And those heaped geese, which are the suitors, of course, who have been, hounding her for years. And now suddenly she realised she's going to miss them. She liked having them around. She liked the attention.
They've been trying, the suitors, they've been trying to make their way up the pecking order, dare I say it. And of course, the fact that the beggar, stroke Odysseus has returned, means that they're going to be put, as we heard in my reading from the Great Hall, they're going to be put in their place. They're going to get arrows in their necks and spears in their hearts and so on. A final thought, Pele. In the main edition, and this is as long as the main edition, such is the nature of the Odyssey.
I knew it would be.
Yeah, so much for a 10-minute recap. It just can't be done. This is almost as long now as the Chris Nolan film, 2 hours 53 minutes running time. I think that is. In the main edition, let's call it that. Still, we asked whether Nolan's Flockbuster even acknowledges the poetry at its root, and I can say now definitely that Nolan does, because I heard him interviewed on Radio 4, and on a couple of occasions he acknowledged that it was a poem in his reading of the poem. Whether the poetry is acknowledged in the film itself in some way by a character or by some other filmic device, we shall have to wait and see. Literally, we'll have to wait and see. And for you, I think it's going to be quite a wait, because you're off on a 10-day retreat, I think. Is that right?
Yes, I'm off to do Vipassana meditation, which is a voyage all of its own.